The cloudy, moonless sky cast a black, silent blanket over the winding, unpaved country road. "A good time to move, Alfie," Batty whispered. He liked the dark. He liked the cold nights. These were the best nights in his line of work. Nobody to bother him while he went about his work. Just the occasional fellow traveller making the journey from somewhere to somewhere else. It was easier when the fellow traveller was alone, but Batty sometimes enjoyed the challenge of a small group. Never more than 3, though. Too risky. "Come on, Alfie," he whispered. Alfie, his shaggy old grey pony, who had been munching noisily on some long grass a few yards away, raised his head, gave a loud sigh, then sauntered slowly to Batty's side. Batty slung his rug on Alfie's back, threw his leg over, and they set off down the rough road, in search of what Batty called goodies. "Like lightning we are, me old friend," Batty whispered. He often spoke to the old pony, to pass the time as they plodded along. "Been in this business a long time, I have, Alfie," he told his pony for the 1,000th time. "D'you know, I started picking pockets when I was only 5 years of age." Alfie made no reaction. He just kept his slow, steady pace in the dark. "Yes, Alfie, 5 years of age. I had a little girlfriend and all, Molly, the fishmonger's daughter." He smiled sadly in the darkness as the thought of himself and Molly, the fallen leaves nearly up to their knees, kissing around the side of St. Andrew's Church. "So by the time I was 7, I was famous already." He hesitated. "Well, famous among the young criminal community in Dublin, at any rate. Best pickpocket in the city I was, and proud of it." He stopped talking for a few minutes and simply enjoyed the deep, comfortable sound of the pony's breathing and the clip-clop of his hooves on the rough road as he smiled and thought about his early childhood. "I forgot all about her, Alfie. I was too caught up in me work," Batty went on. "It must have broke her sweet little heart to see me hanging around with all that thieving crowd, so it must. But I left little Molly behind. First mistake I made it was. And the last. Fame comes at a price. I learned that the hard way, so I did. Christmas Eve it was. Me 8th birthday. That was the day. There he was, the bailiff, standing out in the middle of Fishamble Street, roaring at some poor idiot. I walks past, as cool as a bucket of wet carrots. I lifts it right out of his pocket. Do you know what I lifted out of the bailiff's pocket? Alfie. Alfie just plodded along. Clip, clop, clip, clop. That's right, Alfie. The whole morning's takings. Every farthing that brutal old galoot of a bailiff was after collecting from the poor old fishmongers, all tucked nicely into his plump little leather pouch. I lifted it and I ran. Gone I was. Before he even missed his purse, I was gone, so I was. But she seen me, Molly. Poor little broken-hearted Molly, the fishmonger's daughter, she seen me.
Mister!
Says she, screaming at the top of her voice like. The bailiff turns around.
It was the bold Betty Mulligan, mister! It was Betty Mulligan what took your budget, so it was! I know where he is, mister! I know where Betty Mulligan does hide, so I do!
Then she leads the big ugly brute of a bailiff right to me. Sure, I wasn't far away. I was only after running down George's Lane and jumping the church wall. That's where they found me, so I was, counting out the coins behind the wall of St. Andrew's Church. Clip, clop, clip, clop. He took no mercy on me, small as I was, locked me up in that cold, smelly, miserable brideway, so he did. By the time I managed to escape, I was nearly 12. 4 long, lonely, boredom years in that awful dump. Well, they taught me a few things, them 4 years did. From that day on, I never stayed in one place for longer than a month. I never made me name known to a soul, apart from your good self, of course. I never robbed a bailiff again. But that was many years ago. Batty Mulligan was no backstreet pickpocket now. He was the bold Batty Mulligan, the highwayman, but only he knew that. And Alfie. They would travel by night, find a hidey hole, then wait for the right goodie to come along. Batty would do what had to be done. Then they would move. On this particularly dark night, Alfie could hardly see where he was going. Batty only realised they had entered a forest when he was knocked off Alfie's back by a low branch. Alfie, he whispered angrily, rubbing his elbow. Watch where you're going. You could have killed me. Alfie gave a sigh and began to nibble on some pale young sycamore leaves. Betty held his hand up, right in front of his eyes, but the darkness was so complete that he couldn't even see it. "Right," he said. "I suppose we'll just have to wait here till the dawn comes. I like to work in the dark, but this takes the biscuit." Feeling around with his hands, he found Alfie. He patted the old pony on the shoulder, saying, "Good night, Alfie," then curled up under a tree, pulled his hood over his face, and closed his eyes. He was soon fast asleep and dreaming. He dreamed that he was a small boy, paddling in the river Liffey with his friend Molly. They climbed up the riverbank and walked up the little lane, all the time growing older. In his dream, he and Molly, now both grown up, walked up Dame Street, hand in hand, smiling and laughing in the sun, all the time growing older. They walked through the door of St. Andrew's Church. He looked at Molly, who now wore a long sky-blue dress, a white veil covering her short, black hair. The little church was packed full of all the people Batty had known when he was a little boy. His mother was there, smiling in her best Sunday dress. Molly's father and mother were there, with their barrow of shellfish. Alfie was there too, his coat neatly groomed, his hooves polished. The boys from the bridewell were there too, waving at Betty. The priest was at the altar, his back turned to the crowd. Molly smiled, saying,
"Come on, Alfie, it's time to move."
In his dream, this made perfect sense to Betty. He took Molly's hand and they slowly walked up the aisle, every step they took echoing up into the high ceiling of St. Andrew's. When Betty and Molly reached the altar, the priest turned around, but it wasn't the priest, was it? Betty looked at his lovely Molly, who was laughing, mocking him.
"The bold Batty Mulligan."
She laughed.
"The bold Batty. Here he is, mister. I told you I knew where he was."
By now, everyone in the church was laughing and joining in with Molly. "The bold Batty Mulligan," they all shouted together. He turned to the priest, who was, of course, the cruel-hearted bailiff, who had locked him up for 4 years. "Who are you, and what are you doing in these woods?" said the bailiff calmly in a cold, flat tone. "I'm Batty Mulligan, father, and this is my Molly, father. We was hoping to be getting married, me and Molly, father," Betty answered. The bailiff then poked Betty's arm with a stick, again saying, "Who are you, and what are you doing in these woods?" Betty suddenly realised 2 things. The first, this was a dream. The second, somebody who wasn't in the dream really was poking his arm with a stick. As he felt the tip of the stick poking into his arm again, he grabbed it, intending to use it as a weapon against this nosy person. But Nosy didn't let go. He simply asked again, slowly and in a deeper voice, "Who are you? What are you doing in these woods?" It was still completely dark, so Betty had no idea what he was dealing with. He got to his feet, still holding the end of the stick, and said, "Who are you? What do you want in the woods?" Betty felt the stick begin to shake. At first gently, then more and more violently. He realised that Nosy was laughing silently. "You want to know who I am?" said a jolly, giggly woman's voice. Betty looked around desperately, trying to get an idea of his surroundings, but there was only darkness. By now, laughter was filling the air. It was a slow, creepy kind of laughter. A laughter without joy, full of mockery and hatred. At first it was a shrill, thin, old woman's laughter. Then, after a long, gasping intake of breath, it was a monstrous, wheezing, sickly laughter. All this time Betty held tightly onto the stick, in the hope of jerking it away if he got the chance. Then another voice came, an ice-cold, hissing voice.
"Hold tightly on the stick,"
it said.
"You're gonna need it."
Betty could feel that Nosy had loosened his grip on the stick, so he seized his moment and yanked it away. As he swung the stick at where he thought the voice had come from, he felt 2 strong hands grabbing him from behind. He screamed as he felt his mouth being forced wide open.
"What's happened to me?"
was his only thought, as he felt the horrible creature climbing head first into his mouth. The stick fell to the ground. Betty felt his neck would surely burst open as the beast crawled down his throat and into him. Then, when it was over, he closed his mouth. Although he knew it was still dark, he could now see. He could see everything. There was Alfie, standing half asleep, not far away. He looked down at the stick now lying at his feet and laughed.
"You see what I mean?"
said the hissy voice. But this time the hissy voice was coming straight out of Betty's own mouth.
Well,
Said Betty out loud.
isn't this just magical?
Come on, Alfie. Time to move.
Baka!